Hello, hello. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
We have about 17 people and counting coming in the room. And if all of us tracking this current live Zoom, we all just watch Zach and John from Tiny House Tales and Tiny House Nation talk about Dan doing a lot of work in the country with a number of people, of course. But you've been pretty busy legalizing tiny homes for the past few years, right, Dan?
Yeah, I've been at it since 2015, and slowly but surely we're making major progress around the country.
Yes, wonderful. We've got all kinds of people from around the country. Everyone's putting in the chat. We've got sunny Southern California, Virginia, Las Vegas, Ontario, Canada. Anyone else from another country out there? Montana, Massachusetts, Australia, Redmond, Oregon, Georgia, Rhode Island, and more. We've got a great presentation for you. So I'm going to share my screen. And let us know in the comments, are you in a city or jurisdiction where you feel like tiny homes on wheels are legal? Yes or no? Do you know? And are you interested in joining the effort? Because the future of living tiny legally is now. There has been a ton of work that's been going on by the Tiny Home Industry Association, which I am super excited to be a member, and I would call myself an ambassador of THIA. I've been going to my 11th show this year where I have this big banner where I educate people about the benefits of legalizing tiny and, of course, joining the team and the efforts of THIA. And so what this webinar is really going to cover is the deep dive into the groundbreaking collaboration between the International Code Council and the Tiny Home Industry Association, focusing on the standards development process for movable tiny homes. That sounds like a mouthful, but let me tell you, in a nutshell, it is a major advancement that we've been looking for in our industry because of all the challenges that movable tiny homes or homes that are seen as RVs, those pesky wheels that Dan refers to, have been receiving. And so with this kind of energy, we've got another opportunity to reach goals and potential approaches for inspection and permitting that have not been present for us, and how this can rapidly create more placement opportunities for tiny homes around the US and being used around the world, because of whatever we do here can also be expanded and brought other places, and how you can be involved in the consensus process. We are absolutely a welcoming bunch. We want to lead with consensus, and I love it. Brad just joined us. Brad is the chairman and CEO. When I first met Brad, his focus, or at least the takeaway I got from Brad, was his dedication to diversity. Brad's actually got a lot of experience with standards development, and the key word there is diversity, diversity of thought, opinions, you name it. And that is what creates a really quality standard. And of course, Dan Fitzpatrick, THIA president, and then myself, THIA member. And I will scoot on to the next. So in today's webinar, we're going to discuss the history and evolution of the need for building standards for movable tiny homes, or tiny homes on wheels. They are often referred to as both. The multi-year history of THIA and the ICC relationship, and why the ICC and the THIA partnership is so critical right now, and how you can be involved. And then, of course, the process and timetable for the standards development. All right, Dan, take it away.
Okay, well, let's go to the next slide. Okay, as most of you know, there's two major barriers to living tiny legally. First is zoning codes nationally that cause a great deal of difficulty. And the second one is building code. And we've been focusing a lot as an organization on bringing building codes around to such an extent that the units that are being built can be lived in as permanently habitable dwelling units. And those are key terms of art, permanently habitable dwelling units. And we've been working with basically the past 10 years plus several different codes. Most movable tiny homes or tiny homes on wheels have been built to RV code standards. either the NFPA 1192 or the ANSI 1195 standards. The 1195 standards are commonly known as park models. The problem with that RV code is that they're defined in most states and many municipal jurisdictions as for seasonal or part-time use only. There are states and municipalities that won't let you live in them at all or kick you out after 120 or 180 days, etc. And the RV industry, it will be over their dead body that they will allow units to be built and laws passed that one could live in them on a permanent basis. Some builders around the country have been building tiny homes, units under 400 square feet to the HUD code. And we have several of them that have exactly the same unit that they can either sell as an RV or that it's built to the HUD code. And those units are usually more acceptable in various jurisdictions. And another option is to build the units as a modular, but again, they're on a chassis with wheels, and that causes a lot of heartburn in various states and municipalities that even though there's nothing against building something on wheels in the International Building Code, most municipalities take the position that it needs to be on a permanent foundation. So over the past several years, and Brad will be taking it from here, we'll go through the various steps we've been working with as an industry and as an organization to work with the International Code Council on putting in provisions that are tiny friendly. And let's go to the next slide and I'll turn it over to Brad.
Yeah, we have been working with the ICC since the very start of the Tiny Home Industry Association. In fact, the Tiny Home Industry Association was originally formed to write tiny house standards. That is the primary reason for our existence. And it remains so today. And we recognized very early on, and this is before I was even involved, but the Tiny Home Industry Association recognized very early on that they needed to have a close relationship with the ICC because they have their I-codes and other building standards form the basis for the building codes and building standards in all of the United States, 5 U.S. territories and numerous foreign countries. So part of that work was already started before THIA began, but at approximately the same time THIA began, work began with the IRC to add tiny house provisions to the international residential codes. That's what this top picture is of the 2016-17 International Code Council with Appendix Q. THIA had a significant amount of input there, as did other tiny house enthusiasts and some of the original pioneers of the tiny house movement. We continued our work with the ICC rather, and continued to work with them to make improvements to Appendix Q. The result was the 2018 IRC Appendix AQ, shown there at the bottom of the page. And we helped guide and actually finance key developments and clarifications within the context of Appendix AQ. Most notably, we got the safety specs for ladders and ship's ladders, alternating stair alternating tread devices and stairwells increased to 300 pounds rather than 200 pounds it was in the original Appendix Q. Fact is, over half the male population in the United States weighs over 200 pounds. So half the guys in the country wouldn't have been able to use the stairs in tiny houses if they were constructed as Appendix Q. Anyway, THIA helped not only create those improvements to the original Appendix Q, but we also made significant gains toward clarifying the original intent of Appendix Q. Depending upon the voice inflection you use to read Appendix Q, you could get its content to mean very different things. We believe we removed most of those ambiguities from the original Appendix Q. The result is Appendix AQ. And we continue to work with them today. Go to the next slide. Last year, as a joint publication between the ICC, THIA, and the Modular Building Institute, and actually the Modular Home Builders Association, the 2022 ITHP, that's the International Tiny House Provisions, was published. This is a publication that includes the entire body of the IRC with the provisions of Appendix AQ, the 2021 IRC Appendix AQ, embedded into the body of the IRC in the appropriate locations. So you could see what the IRC would look like if the tiny home provisions were inserted directly into the body of the IRC. It also makes very clear to building officials how those tiny house provisions are to be interpreted, and it makes clear what their intent is within the context of the existing body of the IRC. Also included in that is the entire text from HUD code, the HUD Manufactured Housing Code. There's also clarifications in there and educational material that talk about the difference between the different building standards, including the RVIA's standards, those being NFPA 1192 and ANSI A119.5. Though the text of those two publications are not included because they are copyrighted works of the RVIA, and we don't have publication rights for that, and neither does the IRC. We would have preferred to be able to include that, but the ITHP does have clarifications in it that tell how those standards are relevant and how they augment or are different from the IRC with the provisions of Appendix AQ and the HUD Manufactured Housing Code. Sometime within about the next month or so, there will be a joint publication from ICC and THIA that will be the Tiny House Building It Right Handbook. This is intended for builders, and regardless of whether you're DIYers or whether you're a commercial manufacturer of tiny homes. And it gives pretty clear instruction what's important to pay attention to if you're trying to build tiny homes for compliance with the IRC, well, and frankly, the IBC as well, the International Building Code. Okay, go to the next slide, please. This slide is a little bit outdated. The deadline to apply to this committee was August 31st, as you can see here. We're very grateful to the ICC that they've asked us to collaborate on future standards development. And this will be implemented as an ANSI accredited standards development process under the auspices of the ICC, through collaboration with THIA, to create ANSI accredited national standards. The goal here is to cover the unique attributes of tiny house construction that are not already well covered within the context of the IRC, the IBC, or the offsite modular building standards. And like I say, the deadline to apply for membership on that committee has passed. However, the process will be open to anyone who wants to be involved, and the meetings will be available for attendance by the public, and they'll be able to materially participate in this process. So this is a very transparent process. The committee itself will be somewhere between 12 and 15 voting members, but literally everyone who shows up to the meeting has a say in what happens during those meetings. So we're hoping that we will have lots of participation in these meetings, because the more people are involved, the better the work product will be in the long run. I think Lindsay mentioned earlier the need for diversity. The ICC is very careful that they want to have a broad variety of professions and types of experience available among the membership of that meeting, of that committee, rather. So at the bottom of the slide, we have the Offsite Construction Tiny Houses Standards Consensus Committee. There'll be some discussion at the International Code Council Conference and Expo. That's coming up here in what, about a week and a half, isn't it, Dan?
Yeah, and what's really exciting about this Code Council Expo and conference this year in St. Louis is that one of our members, Wind River, will be having on the Expo floor one of their tiny home units. And Brad and I and the folks from Wind River will be there to show and demonstrate the quality of these builds to all the building officials from all across the United States.
This really represents a fundamental shift in the demeanor of the ICC. They're actually bringing the visibility of tiny homes right into the forefront. This is their annual conference. And for them to make a big deal about the tiny, by bringing in a tiny house for display is a fundamental shift in their approach to tiny houses. So we've come a long way since 2016, where you might hear people among the Code Council saying things like buildings don't have wheels, tiny houses must be RVs. And I think that the management of the ICC is trying to drive this point home very vividly by making this one of their primary exhibits. You can't walk into that exhibit hall without noticing there's a tiny home here. And my expectation is that literally everyone of the expected 2,000 people that are going to attend this conference will probably take a tour of the Wind River Tiny House. Let's go to the next slide.
And let me talk about this here. Some people ask, well, why is it so important to have a partnership with ICC? And as many of you know, my background is I was spent a good portion of my career in local government as either a city manager or county administrator. And quite frankly, all the states and most municipalities in the United States, all 30,000 of them, use as a base for their building codes from the ICC. That's the beginning and the end of the standards that they deal with. And the conference we just talked about that we're going to is ICC is totally made up of building officials, both at the state and local levels from around the country. And so that when you're dealing with development of building standards, it's a two-step process. The first step, quite frankly, is the easiest, and that's writing the standards. Now you have a standard that is built specifically for this type of a product. But the second portion of it is once it's been approved and ANSI has signed off on it, that it is a recognized national standard, it doesn't go into effect until it's approved by the states and local governments. And in some cases, that has to be by both. In some states, sometimes it's just a state, and sometimes it's home rule. You know, it all depends. But again, it has to be approved at the local level. And by having a publication, having a standard developed by ICC as one of their I codes is worth its weight in gold for us to get it approved at the state and local government levels, because that's what all of their codes, you know, are based on. So that we will, the minute there is a code developed, a standard developed at the national level, it can be incorporated into Maine or California or Florida or whatever building codes, and then adopted by the various municipalities so that you can build tiny homes on wheels legally in accordance with this new standard. Next slide. As I said, and I think Brad said it earlier, the basis of the building codes is recognized in all 50 states, 5 U.S. territories, and numerous countries around the world, and most local municipalities. Even though some countries don't cite the ICC, if you read their codes, they basically cut and pasted major portions of the building codes from the U.S. code, and that's the basis for their codes around the country or for around the world. So by partnering with ICC, we're partnering with the gold standard of building standards, and it will be just absolutely worth its weight in gold for us to work with our local building officials with a code that's been written by and approved by and has the, I call it the good housekeeping stamp of approval from ICC, that it will get adopted at the local levels.
Something else that's worth mentioning too is that the ICC has recently been recognized by the Canadian government as a standards developer for Canada.
Next slide. And we talked about the application deadline has passed, but as Brad said, once the committee is chosen this year, all of the meetings are transparent. They're open to the public. Everyone will have an opportunity to have their input orally or in writing or in both to develop the building standards for what we refer to as movable tiny homes or tiny home on wheels. So that there would be, out of this will be a consensus developed for the how to build you know, our product, and will be incorporated into the new standard. Hopefully the committee, I'm sure the committee will be formed and named later this year, and will begin work later this year. And again, all of those um, times and dates are open to the public, and we'll make sure on our THIA website that they are, announced so that those of you that wish to be involved can tune in and work with the group to get this project done.
One other thing to mention that I forgot to mention before is that when there is a candidate for publication, a standard, if there's a draft standard that's a candidate for publication, it goes out for public comment. People from the public have as much sway over the comment resolution as the committee members do. And so the committee, it's incumbent on the committee to address all comments that are relevant and within the purview of the committee to address.
Again, this slide sort of summarizes what we just talked about, that ICC does take pride in an open and transparent standards development process. And the committee members, as Brad mentioned, will be folks that both build and live in tiny homes, and municipal officials and others involved in the industry. So it'll be a broad group of folks that will be involved in the development of the standards. And also, you don't have to pay some organization to join and be a participant in this process. It's open to anyone that wants to be part of the Zoom calls as they're developing this process. Anyone can participate. Also, as an organization, as those that are members and whatever, we have all of the builders nationally, we'll be meeting on an ongoing basis, talking about areas of issue or things that we need to work on consensus as we develop these standards. So there'll be meetings that will deal with some of the more difficult areas, like placement of the unit on a site and the tie downs and foundation systems necessary to support a tiny home. Next slide. Again, we hope the selection of the committee will take place here in the next couple months and work will begin. As Brad mentioned, there will be drafts developed and circulated. And then once consensus is reached and all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, a final standard gets approved and it's published. Our goal is to try to get it done by mid to late 2025. And once that's published and approved, any state or local government can then approve it for use in their various jurisdictions. Brad, you want to add to that?
No, that pretty well covers it, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a very straightforward, open, process. I know some of the folks that are on this Zoom call have worked on previous ICC committees and understand the amount of time and work that goes into this and the importance of developing consensus and working out all of the issues. Let's go to the next slide.
One thing I would like to mention about the committee, I've seen a list of the candidates or the people who have applied, and I got to tell you, some of the talent that's represented in that pool of applicants is really good. The ICC is going to have a hard time paring down the number of people on that committee to meet their 15-person cap. That's going to be a difficult task for them because there's some really talented people who have applied to participate. And I think there's a high willingness to participate in a materially significant manner.
Yeah, I want to, as many of you have probably seen on various posts that I and THIA and other folks have put out on social media, we've asked you to consider putting your application in to be part of this committee, and many of you have. So we have a great pool of talent to pick from to round out this committee. One thing I'd like to maybe go back to and talk a little bit about. Remember when when we started off this conversation, we talked about the 3 different building codes that tiny homes are built to today, whether it's RVs, HUD standards, or modular builds. And hopefully, in the future, we'll have our own building code for our specific product. We at the Tiny Home Industry Association aren't picking one or the other. We, if you can, if your state or local jurisdiction will permit you to live in a tiny home built to RV standards, have at it. More power to you. The same is true with, HUD standard. We're an organization that is in favor of what I'll call all of the above, whatever works in your municipality. Unfortunately, with most municipalities around the country, they see our product, they see the wheels, they immediately say you're an RV and you can't live in it. You can't live in it permanently. And that's why we're, working so hard to work with the ICC to have a standard that can be easily adopted by local and state governments around the country. And to that end, I would hope each of you would take some time and scan the barcode here and join the Tiny Home Industry Association, our website and newsletters. All THIA members will, do get a monthly newsletter, and that's a good way to keep up to date and up to speed on what's happening over the next year and a half as these standards are developed. And we also report on what's happening in various states and local governments as they move forward to legalize tiny homes and get rid of some of the zoning constraints that's causing a lot of headaches for our members out there in various municipalities.
I would like to point out that THIA is a nonprofit 501c6 organization, and that most of the work done by THIA is done on a volunteer basis. However, we do have costs of operation associated with running the website, managing our social media, and some of the types of presence that we have at tiny house events around the country. So, and we have a rather meager budget, but where most of our support right now comes from membership dues, and so it's really important to us to enjoy the type of support from our members on a membership that renews annually. In order for us to remain involved in this type of thing, we've got to be able to fund some of these things that have ongoing costs associated with them, out of our control. Now, we'll continue operating pretty much as a volunteer-based organization, but again, there are some costs that are incurred from our activities that you can't get from volunteers.
And Lindsay, you may want to jump in here. You give a good dog and pony on why THIA membership is important.
Yes, absolutely. So do we want more legalization of tiny homes around the country? Say yes in the chat, right? Any of that. You've heard all kinds of speakers for the last couple of days speaking about whether it's from trailers to something specific like design, you name it. But the main factor is that the less legal they are, the less we can adopt them. And what is the biggest thing? Like, how many people here are looking for land to place a tiny home? Put LL in the chat, looking for land. If you already own land, put O in the chat, right? There's going to be a lot, I know from earlier chats, a lot of people looking for land. Well, the land and the building standards, if you've got something that people don't understand, meaning the planning department, the elected officials and all that scratching their heads saying it doesn't fit, right? You're taking the round hole and putting it in the square. So we've got to be able to speak the language that they already are very familiar with, the organized bodies that have been doing this work for a very long time. So the more that we can collaborate with that level of people, being the scrappy nonprofit volunteer run organization that we are, it's because there's a demand for this, right? I loved how there was someone mentioned like manufactured homes been around for a long time, but has there ever been a really cool reality TV show about them? No, there has been about tiny houses, like Tiny House Nation. So it's because we've up-leveled the design, the quality. People just love the notion of being able to downsize, simplify. So welcome, please join us as members. Your membership will go very far and you'll hear back about what's going on. And if you are in an area that's not otherwise, even in California where I live, right in the city where I live, we're not allowed to have it on wheels. We're soon to get Mendocino County approved. And it's only because other officials heard what was going on. So the work that Dan did early on in Fresno, we're talking years ago, getting that approved was like a domino effect. And so more and more and more cities, we just heard of like the state of Nevada is going to be requiring tiny home zoning. City or county of Santa Cruz, just for example, is allowing them as accessory in the backyard of a single and as a primary residence on probably certain zone land. So there's a lot of opportunity, and your involvement, if you're to put any dollars anywhere, put it where the opening up of the industry is being done the most. So thank you. There's the pitch. And Brad just shared over 1,200 members joining strong. And we have these great networking events at some of the bigger tiny home shows so that the industry professionals, those of us that are building, that are creating this industry, are getting together. That's the other magic behind what's happening inside this wonderful organization. So thank you so much for tuning in. I'll put the link in here again. There's the QR code. Say yes to membership, and we look forward to welcome you to the family. My weekly webinar calls that go out live that are free, you can join. That's all part of the THIA offering, in that we want to share our resources with you so that your journey can be as simple and easy as possible. That's what all of this big amount of work has been going toward. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Brad, for all of your work. It's just amazing to see how far we've come.
Now, one thing
We're looking-
is available for all members is there's webinars that we've done. I did a webinar on how to teach folks how to work with your local government officials to make change. It's a step-by-step guide on how to legalize tiny homes in your particular city or county or state. And the way we've been able to successfully get this done is you at the local levels make the inroads to your mayor or council members or county commissioners or supervisors, get to them the various points of why they should legalize the tiny homes and how to write an ordinance to do that. And once you get them interested and they want more information, what happens is our members give me a call and I get on the Zoom call with mayors. Lindsay's been part of many of them with me around the country, and we literally sit there and help them and show them how to write their ordinances to permit movable tiny homes as legal dwelling units. And that's happened all over the country now, from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, to cities and locales in Florida, Colorado, all over California, Oregon, Washington, etc. And what's really nice now is they're popping up without sometimes even our input. But I look at the ordinance that they write, and they stole the language I I wrote for an ordinance 5 years ago.
That's what
So
happened in
that's
Mendocino
good.
County. That's what happened in Mendocino County. Supervisor Williams was tired of being told that tiny homes weren't allowed when all these other jurisdictions were passing them. All of a sudden, he's talking, and some friend of mine says, "Hey, they're talking about tiny homes in an agenda with no support whatsoever." So Dan and I came along with all this type of support. We have a movable tiny home briefing document that can help give any elected official and planning department and planner or staffer a lot of information in a very quick time frame. And this is the slide deck that you get to utilize. So for $25, these resources are phenomenal. Let me just show you. This is the advocacy series. And when we go back to the resource library, there's a community development. How many of you are interested in developing a tiny home community? Say yes in the chat for community. This is the community development webinar series. Because Dan, you've got some other background besides government, right?
Yeah, for 25 years, I've been a developer. And so I've done a seminar series on how to develop tiny home communities. I did a two-day seminar out in Colorado Springs last year on that, and we had a number of folks from around the country that attended that. So we have some. I think we even have a webinar on how to buy land without buying land, and just little tricks of the trade on the various steps you have to go through to do a community development, tiny home community project, and the various thought processes that one needs to go through. So these are things you get as being part of a membership with the tiny home organization. But we're talking about building standards tonight, and maybe Lindsay, you can throw some questions at us that we haven't answered.
I've got one. So are you seeing that it is more fruitful to get approval from individual municipalities versus a whole state?
The answer is it's up. Each state is different. For example, the state of California has the California Building Code, and they have mandated that all municipalities must use Appendix AQ. So it's mandatory across all of the jurisdictions. But in a state like Colorado, they can't do that pursuant to state law. They have the Colorado Building Code, which includes Appendix AQ, but then it's up to each municipality on whether or not they want to use that or not. Or you go into Hawaii, each island is a separate municipal entity. It's each island is a county. There's some islands that are not even into this century. I'm kidding, but that's pretty close to it. Not even into this century in terms of what building codes they permit. So, it's all across the board. And so it's just important that you start asking questions of, is it up to the local municipal government to approve, or do they have to abide by the state, or is it a combination thereof?
So 2 more questions. This is coming from down south. I am an Australian who would love to use those webinars guidance, even though I'm not in the US.
Yeah, it's guidance, and quite frankly, I'm very familiar with Australia, and much of their building codes and so forth, and the standards are very much based off of the standards we have here in the United States. In fact, Australia is the only country in the world that has a higher per square footage use of families in their homes besides the United States.
And we do have a question from our dear friend, Nick Mosley. How does the new THIA standard, or tiny home standard, sorry, differ from the RV or HUD standard?
Well, it'll be based off, quite frankly, let's get to the nub of this whole thing. A real builder of tiny homes, what we in the industry view as tiny homes, not glorified park models or glorified RV. What our builders are really building are stick-built homes, just like they were built in the backyard, or on a piece of property. They just happen to be built on a chassis. So quite frankly, most of our builders, our real builders of quality tiny homes, are already building 98% of the way there to the International Residential Code standards, right? We just have to deal with some very specific issues that relate to a product that moves up and down the highway that's not permanently affixed to the ground and has, space, issues and requirements that need to be dealt with. And so I think it's going to be very healthy and good for our community to have a true tiny home standard, because quite frankly, I'm getting tired of seeing ads on the internet of so-and-so has these tiny homes for sale, and you go look it up, it's nothing more than an RV that someone screwed some plywood to. Those are not tiny homes. A real tiny home is a habitable dwelling unit that's built to high quality standards with the insulation and facilities for independent daily, living. And that's what our quality builders around the country are building. And so having a good solid standard is going to be very helpful to us in terms of a product and the association.
What I find interesting, if you think about it, most of our builders, they didn't just say one day I'm just going to start building a tiny home and I have no background in building. They actually come from the residential building community. So for them to all of a sudden go build a 2x2 wall wouldn't even come to their mind. That is why we have the higher quality building to begin with, right? Our buddy Nick, how many years, Nick, did you work in residential, whether it's remodeling or building homes? So that is why we have what we have, but we've been able to use the RV standard just because it's been there. It doesn't fit anymore.
And just to the RV standards, especially the NFPA standards, remember, those are standards that allow for a pop-up tent trailer. Literally, you can have canvas walls. That's not a tiny home. That's not what we're building. Right? Even park model standards have, the minimum. If you build a unit and call it a tiny home to the minimum park model standards, it has, you can have a minimum of R5 insulation in the walls. That's nothing, right? So being able to have a really solid quality standard for our builders and for our end users, that this is truly a tiny home, not some glorified RV, using minimal standards, I think will help us a lot as an industry.
Absolutely. In fact, what type of insulation are you building with, or that you're building to, Nick? I don't know if there's another builder out there. If you are listening in, chiming in, like, what are your traditional, we're just going to talk about insulation. There's a lot of things involved with the building standard. But that's super, yeah, R15 minimum in walls. And in some cases, many builders build more, they do upgrades, whatever. I know some builders are doing R20 into R30 in the ceilings and in the flooring. Yep, 23 to 20 in the ceiling. So put yourself in a very cold climate or a hot climate. Would you rather have an R5 in the wall or R27 or R30 in the wall? That means less heating, less air conditioning, and you're able to retain. And now we get into these homes are actually built more sustainably, less energy consumption. What's happening with energy in our country? It's only going up. So all of these things point towards our tiny homes being built well to quality building standard that we set. We as a community, the committee led by people in consensus can create that which we need so we can get that approved and we can move it around. I think Nick said something just to point out. So this new standard means that we could have a home that can actually be moved because it's on wheels and you can legally live in it full time, where you cannot in a typical recreational vehicle because it's known as a temporary living.
What's also nice, I'd like to just add, Brad talked a little bit about the new tiny home handbook that's coming out this next month. We've had quite a bit of input into that. I think it'll be a lot better 2 or 3 years from now. But right now, let's say you're building or have built a tiny home on wheels and you take it to a local government official. Right now, many of them, they see a product that's on wheels and they immediately say, no, you can't do that. That's an RV. Well, now you'll be able to have a handbook that you can show them from ICC saying there's nothing that prevents one from building this in accordance with the standards. They can be on wheels. And what's even nice in the acknowledgments, right in the like page 2 or 3 of the booklet, it acknowledges Brad and Nick Mosley and others in the tiny world that were part of having input, into this document. Show that to a local building official, and automatically your credibility goes sky high because you're now showing that this has been signed off by ICC.
So there was a question about, there are RV manufacturers that build to what they call 4-season, better quality and so on. What are your thoughts about the difference of those companies that do build to that higher quality? A few were mentioned. I'm not going to read them, but a few were mentioned in the chat, versus a tiny home.
Well, the answer is real simple. I've pushed bills around the country to legalize tiny homes built to those standards. And you know who shows up to testify against us every single time? Is the lobbyist for RVIA. RVIA, it's over their dead body that they will allow states to enact laws to say that you can live in on a permanent basis anything built to any of their RV standards, including the park model standards, right? That's their position. They showed up against us in Massachusetts, Maine, Florida, Oregon, etc. And Colorado. Nick, Brad was in on those conversations with us in Colorado. And so even though a builder says, yes, I'm building something that you can live into 4 seasons, is their organization, their standard is specifically designed, quote unquote, for part-time habitation, and they won't deviate from that.
Which is why we need our own.
Yeah.
There's that industry has been around with that building standard for a long time, and our industry has been around for a long time, but has none until the great work of what all of you have been doing here at THIA.
By the way, to put a little bit finer point on what Dan was saying, the RVIA does actively lobby against using RVs or park model RVs for long-term residential use. What they won't comment on is if that same building is actually up certified to other building codes or building standards that are appropriate for long-term use. Certainly, if you build all the way to IRC standards, no one's going to tell you you can't use that for long-term residential use, even if it's also certified to a park model RV spec. And somehow they just put they don't want to talk about that fact. They just lobby against using their standards as any sort of basis.
You're going to love this
for
question,
a
Brad.
building that's built for long-term residential use.
Sorry, Brad. How much money do we need to donate to get a bunch of lobbyists for THIA?
About $200,000 or $300,000 a year.
And we're asking for $25.
Now, I spent a good portion of my career when I was doing government work as a lobbyist to various state legislatures, and trust me, lobbyists get paid a lot of money to, for in the private sector to carry the ball, and that's why, for example, in Florida, there's no way I can go up against the RVIA association with hundreds of thousands of dollars that they give in campaign contributions and pay lobbyists a year from our little organization, right? We have to develop our own path and stay out of the path of the RV industry. The RV industry will not let us in, period.
So we've done this grassroots style. You know, it started with Fresno. What year was that, Dan?
Say again?
What year was Fresno?
Oh, God, 2014, 2015. Nick
Right.
probably knows. We got that done in 24 hours, but the next municipality I took it to was a little community called Los Angeles. And we got it passed in Los Angeles, and that certainly then put us on the map to allow movable tiny homes as accessory dwelling units.
And may people be informed, we've got City of Los Angeles, San Jose, San Diego, and Phoenix are 4 out of the top 10 cities that are most populated in the nation. And if you think about California as I think it moved into the 4th largest economy in the world. So we've got the people, we've got the push, we've got the domino effect. Right now, it's just natural that we start getting that attention at the level of working with the ICC, because this, this is no longer a trend, right? We're not
Well,
a trend.
we're about to get Austin, Texas. So we're getting there. We have Portland, Oregon, Phoenix, Arizona, Oakland, California. So slowly but surely, it's taking off around the country. And the minute we have our own code, we can get hundreds, if not thousands, of municipalities and whole states signed on in a very short order.
But Julie, unfortunately, we don't have New Jersey yet. So go get them, right? Find your local. I'm going to give you the quick Cliff Note version of the finding the right people, the elected official and the planner that are really passionate about housing. Finding that champion and then getting them in front of Dan and having them understand what's possible for meeting their housing needs. Because just in the state of California, we need 2.5 million homes in 8 years. Times that by the 2,000 to 3,000 square foot of an average home. We don't have the land, we don't have the roads, we don't have the services to provide all that. We just don't have it. So how are we going to meet the needs? And that's just the state of California. We've got housing needs all over the world with their own numbers. So we're not going to do that building 2,000, 3,000 square foot homes. All right. Any last questions? I know we've got some other speakers coming up. This is going till I think 8:30 tonight with a networking hour. There's the link, Tiny Home Industry Association. Join us. And any last words, Dan, Brad?
Hey, thank you, everyone. And anyone that has any questions or comments, feel free to send us a note through our THIA webpage, or we have a THIA Facebook page.
Brad?
Dan covered what I was going to say. He stole my subjects.
Awesome. Thank
By
you
the way,
all.
Dan's a lot better speaker than I am, so I like to let him go first.
Cool. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful night. Keep learning what you're learning and join the movement. Be well.